Hello and welcome back to a new episode of my podcast, The True Crime Cocktail Hour. After a tough week of work, this is where we come together to enjoy a little after-work cocktail together and take a closer look at a true crime case. My name is Holly. Thank you so much for joining me today. This is part 3 of the 4-part series Historical True Crime Cases, and for this one, we're going to the United States of America. And for today's case, I'll be making us one of my all-time favorite cocktails, the Pornstar Martini. If you want to know how to make this cocktail and the things you're gonna need for it, just keep on watching. I'll add the ingredients and several steps to make this cocktail right here over the course of the video. So all that's left to say is you sit back, get comfy, I'll get everything ready, and then we get started with case 3 historical true crime cases, the rise and fall of the Goat-Gland doctor. We get straight into it with the man around whom this entire story revolves. May I introduce? This is Dr. John Romulus Brinkley. John Brinkley was born in 1885 in North Carolina as the illegitimate son of a military doctor. Now, despite the fact that his father was also a doctor, the family lived under very poor conditions and was literally ravaged by serious illnesses. John's mother died of pneumonia when he was only 5 years old, and then 5 years later he also had to bury his father. There's this surprisingly good audio recording in which John talks about this time in his life, so let's take a listen.
Mama had died on April 23rd, 1891. When I was just a little more than 5 years of age. And I did not have any brothers or sisters. So when Daddy was gone, everything was gone. And as I stood by his unfilled grave, in my little heart of hearts I resolved to be a doctor like Daddy was.
So, long story short, at his father's grave, John decides that he wants to become a doctor too. He definitely has the scientific curiosity for it. I mean, after his parents' death, he would live with relatives for some time, and there he would mix and throw together everything he could find in the household, like laundry detergent, alcohol, water, oil, just to see what would happen if you mix those things together. You know, like a cocktail. But life doesn't mean well with John. At the age of 11, he had to take a job as a letter carrier just because he needed money. He needed money to survive. But because of his job, he just visited school irregularly. And then on top of that, studying medicine is damn expensive. When he was 20 years old, John married his first wife, a woman named Sally. She was the same age as him, and together they started their first business together. So the two of them would travel around North Carolina and sell their handmade healing potions and ointments on various markets. Now, in order to sell their goods, Sally and John came up with a very great marketing idea, namely theatrical plays. So in this whole theatrical play, Sally would play the desperate patient who had been suffering from various pains and symptoms for years. John Brinkley would play the good-looking and understanding and caring doctor, and he would go and slather the ointments all over his patient. And of course, these ointments would relieve the patient's pain and symptoms at record speed. And Sally, as the patient, was suddenly happy and cheerful again. And it may be hard to believe, but these people would literally snatch the healing potions and ointments out of Sally's and John's hands. The thing is, whatever they're doing, is not legal. John is reported several times because he sold these ointments without a license. In order to get a license, you had to be a doctor. In order to become a doctor, you had to go to medical school and get a degree. And John doesn't have all of these things. However, he had earned a little money, and so he decided to enroll in a medical college. But the thing is, this college doesn't even offer a normal medical degree, It was merely focused on herbal medicine. And the diploma you would get from this college is hardly recognized anywhere. So even if Brinkley attended this school, got a degree from the school, he would still not be a doctor. Honey, I have no idea. I don't know what he was thinking. Doesn't matter though, because Brinkley prefers to drink himself into a stupor than do some actually studying anyway. Not to mention that he can't or doesn't want to pay his college fees. So after just 1 year, John unsuccessfully dropped out of this university, and he had also accumulated a lot of debt. His wife, Sally in particular, is quite pissed off about these developments. After all, they had 2 children together who needed to be taken care of. So Sally eventually gave her husband an ultimatum. She said, look, either you come to terms with the fact that you do not have what it takes to become a doctor, you get a real job and support your family, or I will leave you and take the kids with me. So what do you think Brinkley did? That's right. Next thing you know, Sally's packing up her stuff. Brinkley had decided to pursue his dream to become a doctor. So over the next couple of years, John continues to attend various dubious medical colleges, but each time he's kicked out for non-performance or late payments. And at some point, Brinkley just had it. If he can't become a doctor legally, the illegal way has to do. So from a shady guy, he bought a fake diploma and thus became Dr. John Romulus Brinkley. So he actually opened up a medical practice without a proper degree and only very scant medical knowledge. And what's more, he has a self-proclaimed speciality. He's just not one of these general practitioners. No. His target audience is impotent men. So on flyers he distributed throughout the entire city, he eagerly advertised his magical injection, which is supposed to increase sexual abilities. The men come in droves and put the equivalent of $700 on the table for this magical injection, which is nothing more but colored water. As you can imagine, things don't go well for too long. And when the first lawsuits came in, Brinkley left the city and his practice in a cloak and dagger operation. He reappears in the small village of Milford in the state of Kansas. But he doesn't show up there alone. In fact, he has a new wife by his side, a lady named Minnie, whom he had met on his escape and married 4 days later. John received some startup capital from her father to open up another practice in Milford, and in fact the people in Milford had been looking for a doctor for quite some time now, so John is welcomed with open arms. Now they expect him to be a general practitioner, even though he just wants to focus on his field of speciality, namely impotent man. But the Spanish flu threw a spanner in his works. In fact, his practice is flooded with flu patients. Many die, and no one really blamed the doctor for the demise of these patients. I mean, it was the Spanish flu. But when the Spanish flu was finally over, Dr. Brinkley could finally get back to his favorite subject. And then one day, a house visit to a farmer would give this whole crazy thing a whole new dimension. So John and this farmer take a leisurely stroll around the farm while the farmer tells John about his ongoing impotence problems. Dr. Brinkley over here doesn't even listen. In fact, he has to watch where he's going because the farmer's young goats were constantly jumping around his legs. So jokingly, John Brinkley eventually said, well, sir, you wouldn't have any problems apparently if you just had the testicles of a goat. So this made the former laugh, and then eventually he replied to Brinkley, also as a joke, well, doctor, just implant me with some goat testicles then. So the farmer is laughing and Brinkley's laughing and everybody is laughing. But then Brinkley suddenly stopped laughing and he's like, I think I just had a phenomenal business idea. So a couple weeks later, Dr. John Brinkley traveled to Chicago to attend, hold on to your hats, a course in surgery. Yeah, I know, honey. Wait, it gets better. Which he failed. He, in fact, failed so hard that the head of this surgery course afterwards went up to Brinkley and asked him, hey, buddy, you sure this is what you want to do? Yes? Okay. Absolutely unperturbed by this, Dr. Brinkley traveled back to Kansas to perform the first ever goat testicle transplant on one of his patients there. Now, let me make something perfectly clear. He did not, in fact, go and replace the jingle bells with the goat testicles. Instead, he would take a goat testicle, cut it into slices, and then glue or sew the slice of goat testicle onto the actual testicle of the patient, like putting a thick slice of sausage on a sandwich. Ugh. And now hold on to your hats. 1 year after this freaking operation, the patient's wife gave birth to a healthy son. It is the headline, the first Goat-Gland baby. Now, it has to be said that John told the newspaper about this story, so I guess things are a little bit fishy. Doesn't matter though, because people don't give a damn. They just believe it. Next thing you know, hundreds of men from all over America who have problems down there come to Kansas to treat themselves to such a fancy operation. Some of them even bring their own goat. Now, before anyone can intervene or expose this whole damn thing as bullshit, the editor-in-chief of the LA Times came up to Brinkley and told him, hey, listen, if you operate on one of my editors, we will run a whole page on you. No sooner said than done. John Brinkley is a freaking legend and filthy rich. I mean, an operation costs the equivalent of $12,000, of which Brinkley performs up to 50 a month. Now, you gotta hand it to him. Brinkley knows how to handle this kind of money. He doesn't use it all for himself, but he uses it to practically renovate Kansas. Sidewalks are repaired, a new water system is built, there's a new post office, there's electricity where there was none before. And the people of Kansas obviously think this is all great and Brinkley's such a great guy. But meanwhile, a group of real doctors sit together at the Medical Association and wonder about the increasing and already high number of death certificates that Dr. Brinkley issues for patients who were actually perfectly healthy. And it is assumed that there is a very high number of unreported cases of people who died of mysterious infections or blood poisoning. And the people who survived such an infection never pressed charges against Brinkley or anything, simply because they were ashamed. And they would then have to explain to the people of the Medical Association why they had a slice of rotten goat tissue on one of their testicles. Brinkley's employees also kept their mouth shut because, morally right or wrong, Brinkley paid them an exceptional high salary. He also bought them gifts, cars, even a whole freaking apartment if he has to. But there's one doctor in the Medical Association who wants to get to the bottom of what is going on with this Dr. Brinkley guy. And this doctor is Morris Fishbane. And he does a little bit of research on Brinkley and he finds out that he's not really a doctor and that he had either bought or forged his diploma. So when the doctor Morris Fishbein published his findings and even issued a public warning on one of Kansas' biggest radio stations, an arrest warrant was issued for Dr. John Brinkley. But the governor of Kansas refused to extradite John Brinkley because he too had a pair of goat testicles. Okay, no, he did not. The reason why he refused to extradite Brinkley is actually much simpler. Brinkley simply brings in too much money for this city. I mean, despite complaints and revelations, people were still queuing up. But Brinkley's opponents would not give up. And in 1931, his medical license was officially revoked. So things don't look good for Brinkley. License gone, practice gone. On top of all of that, a whole pile of lawsuits from which Brinkley fled to Del Rio, Texas. So this is where he wants to make a fresh start, but he doesn't have a license anymore. So he's not allowed to perform surgeries. So instead, he now hired people to perform these surgeries for him. So he was still making big money. And sometimes one or the other patient, slipped him a couple more bills under the table because they wanted to be operated by the man himself. And all the while, Brinkley comes up with yet another great business idea, one more ridiculous than the other. He sells eye drops that were allegedly made by the Mayas themselves. He also comes up with a toothpaste that is supposed to prevent cancer. The people eat this shit up. Meanwhile, his death toll continues to rise. But every time something suspicious happens around Dr. Brinkley and a patient dies under mysterious circumstances, he is always able to kind of sweep it under the carpet. And Morris Fishbein, who's actually quite hot on his heels, is sitting back in Kansas and has to watch everything. And he knows, I have to stop this Dr. Brinkley guy somehow. So in 1938, Morris Fishbein published a 2-part article entitled Modern Medical Charlatans in the magazine Hygeia, in which he wrote about all of Brinkley's criminal frauds and schemes. And Brinkley is furious about this. And he's also scared because he realizes that people are slowly but surely getting suspicious. So he ends up suing Morris Fishbein for $5 million for defamation of character and libel. And that was a huge mistake on Brinkley's part, and it was the beginning of the end. Not only did Brinkley lose this case by a landslide, the verdict triggered a wave of lawsuits against Brinkley. Tax fraud, professional misconduct, manslaughter in numerous cases, and physical assault. He lost his practice and his entire fortune due to high compensation payments, and in 1941, he officially filed for bankruptcy. And just like his parents before him, Brinkley eventually was also struck down by a series of serious illnesses. 2 heart attacks, diabetes, which is actually a death sentence back then, a leg amputation, and in the context of all of these lawsuits and the exposure of his character as an imposter had made him become completely addicted to alcohol. Dr. John Romulus Brinkley died of heart failure in exile in San Antonio 3 years after the legendary verdict, penniless and known as a charlatan. And that, my dear children, was the story of the rise and fall of Dr. John Brinkley, the Goat-Gland doctor. Thank you so much for joining me today. Leave a comment if you like. You can also hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Give this video a thumbs up. It's always a nice thing to see. We will see each other again in 2 weeks for another cocktail and the 4th and last case of the overarching theme, historical true crime cases. For this one, we're going back to France and back to Paris. Until then, have a lovely weekend. Try to relax a little bit. And I'm already looking forward to our next cocktail date. Kiss. Mwah. And I'll see you then.